Tear up the contract. White supremacy ends tomorrow morning. What is black on a Tuesday? Race is a process. Most people arguing about it online don't understand that. Neither do most academics. Every major theory gets arrested at one stage of the process, and then it mistakes that stage for the whole thing. So we're gonna walk through every major conception of race. Garvey, Fanon, Charles Mills, Hannah Arendt, the colorblind right, to the exact point where each breaks, and then I'll show you what's left standing. You can't talk about race without discussing the Negro. Who and what is the Negro? To answer that question, we start with the earliest fully developed conceptions of race, the Pan-Africans. Alex Cromwell is a forefather of the movement, but Marcus Garvey turned that movement into a mass movement with millions of members, a shipping line, and a racial empire in waiting. And in 1923, Garvey answered our exact question in an essay titled, Who and What is a Negro? Garvey's fullest answer came 2 years later from a cell in Atlanta federal prison in an essay titled African Fundamentalism. So in this essay, Garvey writes, as the Jew was held together by his religion, the white races by the assumption and the unwritten law of superiority, and the Mongolian by the precious tie of blood, so likewise the Negro must be united in one grand racial hierarchy. Our union must know no clime, boundary, or nationality. Like the great Church of Rome, Negroes the world over must practice one faith, that of confidence in themselves with one God, one aim, and one destiny. Let no religious scruples, no political machination divide us, but let us hold together under all climes and in every country, making among ourselves a racial empire upon which the sun shall never set. So Garvey said we need no ethnos, no shared values that hold us together outside of our skin color. Anybody with our skin color, anybody that can be called black, needs to see themselves as synonymous, made in the image of everybody else that is black. So for Garvey, to be black or to be a Negro is to fight in a struggle against white supremacy with the goal of creating an internal structure that mirrors the great Church of Rome. But to really contextualize what Garvey's doing, we need to go back to the 1923 essay, Who and What is a Negro? If we were Negroes when we were down under the heel of oppression, then we would be Negroes when we are up and liberated from such thraldom. And then he goes on to say that the prejudice against us as Negroes is not because of color, but because of our condition. Garvey makes two claims in the same essay. Claim one is that if we were Negroes under oppression, we will be Negroes when we are liberated. Race is permanent. It survives liberation. Claim two is that the prejudice against us is not because of color, but because of our condition. And when the condition changes, the problems of race will be smashed to pieces. Race is defined by the condition. Now watch what happens when we run both of those claims at the same time. Take a man who is a Negro under oppression. Now liberate him. By claim one, he is still a Negro. By claim two, if he is a Negro, he is still oppressed. But we just said he was liberated. He is oppressed and not oppressed. And that's a contradiction. Not between Garvey and his critics, but between Garvey and Garvey. Now, some of you will object. Garvey was being sarcastic with that definition. He was mocking the white anthropologists. Fine. But read his last sentence. Change the condition and the racial problem dissolves. He refutes the definition on one page and reasons with it on the next page. Garvey cannot hold the category steady because Negro is doing two jobs in his hands. One job is lineage, a people constituted by what they built, and that's permanent. The other job is classification, a label that tracks a condition, and that's temporary. Garvey's essay makes sense if and only if those two things are pulled apart. One is ethnicity, the other is race. He never pulled them apart though, so the essay contradicts itself. And every theory we look at from here fails in the same way. But hold that thought, we'll pull them apart in the final segment. Garvey used the condition definition as sarcasm. 30 years later, Frantz Fanon picked it up and built an entire ontology on it. Fanon's famous scene, a white child on the train sees him and cries out, "Look, a Negro!" And in that moment, Fanon says his body was handed back to him sealed from the outside. To be black is to be fixed by the white gaze. So how does Fanon propose that we get free? Well, he reaches for Hegel, specifically the master-slave dialectic. And he says that the self proves its worth one way, by staking its life, a savage struggle, convulsions of death. To be black is to be in that struggle, fighting for recognition from the white man. And here's the problem. Fanon is using Hegel's dialectic, so let's hold him to Hegel's dialectic. You have 3 doors, all of them are locked. He dies, and the dead recognize no one. He signals that he's willing to die, and nothing in the world changes. He wins, and the identity that fought the struggle dissolves the day the struggle ends. If black liberation works, blackness disappears. I made an entire video walking through that paradox, and it's called exactly that. The card is above. And I ended that video with the question, what is black if not the struggle? I said the answer was for another video, and this is that video. But before we get to that answer, I want to show you something that video didn't. Where exactly does the trap sit? In Hegel, the self moves through 5 stages toward freedom. The struggle to the death, master and slave, stoicism, skepticism, the unhappy consciousness. The death struggle is stage 1. It's where freedom begins. Fanon takes the beginning of the process and declares it the destination. And Hegel already told us what happens to the one who never moves past stage 1. That's the master. The master wins the first struggle and stays there. And he never works. He never forms the world. He never becomes for himself. Fanon's blueprint for the black man is the master's biography. Now remember Garvey. Garvey couldn't hold the category steady. He wobbled between lineage and condition. But Fanon doesn't wobble. He locks the category to the condition and wills the doors shut. Race becomes ethnicity defined by oppression. Fanon is arrested at the struggle stage. And the next question is, what happens when a philosopher takes this exact trap and gives it a constitution? Charles Mills. He says, white supremacy is the unnamed political system that has made the modern world what it is today. And Mills says that philosophy never talks about it. 2,000 years of political theory. Every system named, except the one that built the modern world. And this omission, he says, is not accidental. So what actually is the racial contract? Philosophy tells a story about a social contract. Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, free and equal persons, agreed to form a society. And Mills wants us to read the fine print. He says, but the peculiar contract to which I am referring, though based on social contract tradition that has been central to Western political theory, is not a contract between everybody, like we the people, but between just the people who count and the people who are really people, we the white people. So it's a racial contract. We the white people. That's the actual agreement underneath the modern world. And race? Race is what the contract produces. He says, the account I favor conceives the racial contract as creating not merely racial exploitation, but race itself as a group identity. In a contemporary vocabulary, the racial contract constructs race. White people do not pre-exist, but are brought into existence as whites by the racial contract, hence the peculiar transformation of the human population that accompanies this contract. The white race is invented, and one becomes white by law. Whiteness was invented as a membership card, and blackness was invented as its exclusion. Now I want to be fair to Mills. This is the most rigorous version of the condition definition ever built. Garvey wobbled into it, Fanon wielded himself inside of it, and Mills gave it articles and clauses. Race stopped being a feeling or a moment of struggle, and it became a system with signatories and enforcement and a paper trail, and that rigor is exactly what exposes the problem. Ask Mills' theory one question. Tear up the contract. White supremacy ends tomorrow morning. What is black on a Tuesday? And here's the thing. I don't have to answer for Mills. Mills answers the question himself. He says, its aim is not to replace one racial contract with another of a different color, but ultimately to eliminate race altogether. To eliminate race altogether. That's not my critique of the theory, that's the theory's mission statement. Fanon gave black identity an expiration date. Mills notarized it and called the expiration the goal. And notice something darker underneath. The racial contract has only white signatories. Black people are in the document, but they are objects of the agreement. They are never parties to it, which means that on this theory, black people didn't write themselves. They were never written. Hold on to that word, written. We're coming back to who holds the pen. Garvey mocked the white anthropologist for deciding who counts as a Negro. Mills built an entire philosophy where whites hold the pen and called it a description. Now some of you will object. Mills is describing the system. He's diagnosing white supremacy. He never claimed to give an account of black peoplehood, and Mills honors resistance. The book is dedicated to the people who resisted the racial contract. And that's cool, but notice what he resists. People resist the contract, and the contract still holds the pen on what race is. Mills even says that a white person can defect from whiteness because whiteness, he writes, is not a color, but a set of power relations, a commitment with nothing underneath. And on his own account, so is blackness. He wrote a complete theory of race, and there's no people in it. If that's all that race is, then everything black people built, the churches, the schools, the music, the lineage, sits outside his theory of what black means. Mills described the classification and mistook it for the whole thing. Mills is arrested at the classification, but Mills did prove something that we need. He proved that race is a political construction, and every construction has a construction date. So the next question is a historian's question. When was race invented? One philosopher answered that with a precision that nobody has matched since. Hannah Arendt. Every construction has a construction date. So when was race invented? Hannah Arendt answered that question in 1951 in The Origins of Totalitarianism, and her answer embarrasses everybody. First, a distinction. Arendt says race thinking and racism are two different things. Race thinking is an opinion, one of many opinions competing freely in the 18th and 19th centuries. Racism is an ideology, a single idea that claims to be the key to all of history. She says, the historical truth of the matter is that race thinking with its roots deep in the 18th century emerged simultaneously in all Western countries during the 19th century. Racism has been the powerful ideology of imperialistic policies since the turn of our century. In the middle of the 1800s, race opinions were still judged by political reason. Tocqueville read Gobineau's racial theory and told him. He said, they are probably wrong and certainly pernicious. Opinions become ideology at a specific moment for a specific job. But hold that thought. Now, the birth certificate. Race thinking was born in France, early 1700s, and his father was a nobleman, the Comte de Boulevilliers. And here's the part that nobody expects. Boulevilliers invented race thinking to use against other white people. He was an aristocrat losing power to the king above him and the rising middle class below him. So he invented a story. France, he said, is two different peoples. The nobles descend from the Franks, who were Germanic conquerors, and the commoners descend from the Gauls, the conquered. Nobility isn't a title, but blood, the right of conquest. Arendt writes, if in the early form of French aristocracy, race thinking had been invented as an instrument of internal division and had turned out to be a weapon for civil war, this early form of German race doctrine was invented as a weapon of internal national unity and turned out to be a weapon for national wars. Understand what this means. The first race theory in Western history was a class weapon. White aristocrats racializing white commoners to protect their position. Race was born in a fight between Frenchmen. It had nothing to do with black people. And the French Revolution answered in kind. Abbe Sieyès told the aristocrats to send back into the forests of Franconia all those families who preserved the absurd pretension of being descended from the conquering race and of having succeeded to their rights. You want to be a separate race? Fine, go back to Germany. Now here's the passage that should stop you cold. Because if race thinking was born in a French class war, what about slavery? Surely slavery was always racist. Arendt says, check the record. So here Arendt argues that even slavery, though actually established on a strict racial basis, did not make the slave-holding peoples race conscious before the 19th century. Throughout the 18th century, American slaveholders themselves considered it a temporary institution and wanted to abolish it gradually. Most of them probably would have said, with Jefferson, I tremble when I think that God is just. Sit with that. The slave system ran for over a century before the ideology that justified it was built. The crime came first. The theory of the victim came after. Racism is not why slavery happened. Racism is the excuse slavery wrote for itself after the fact. And then comes Gobineau, 1853. A frustrated French count whose caste was finished. So he wrote 4 volumes explaining that civilizations fall because of mixed races. Arendt says he invented racism almost by accident. He wasn't explaining black people, he was explaining why noblemen like him didn't run France anymore. And nobody cared. He even tried to get famous by taking a side in the American slave debate. In vain. He had to wait 50 years until imperialism needed him. And that's Arendt's final verdict. The most radical claim in the chapter. She says, imperialism would have necessitated the invention of racism as the only possible explanation and excuse for its deeds, even if no race thinking had ever existed in the civilized world. Read that again. If race thinking had never existed, empire would have invented it anyway because the job required the tool. Race is not a fact that produced politics. Race is a tool that politics produce. It has a birthday, it has a birthplace, it has a father, and it has a job description. So what did Hannah Arendt actually prove? Garvey treated race as destiny, Fanon treated race as ontology, Mills treated race as a standing structure. Arendt walked into the archive and came back with the receipts. Race is an invention, invented by white elites for fights between white factions, and retooled to excuse empire. At no point in its entire biography does race describe what any people actually is. One more thing, buried on page 171, Arendt drops a comparison almost in passing. Gobineau's race doctrine, she says, is a law of decay, and she contrasts him with one philosopher, Hegel. She writes, Hegel, whose philosophy was concerned in great part with the dialectical law of development in history, was never interested in the rise and fall of cultures as such, or in any law which would explain the death of nations. Gobineau demonstrated precisely such a law. Mark that. Race thinking is a doctrine of decay. The dialectic is a doctrine of development. Those are two options on the table, decay or development. So where does Arendt stop? Arendt wrote the definitive biography of the weapon, who forged it, who swung it, what it was for. And in her entire history, the people the weapon was pointed at never appear as makers of anything. She audited the pen perfectly. She never asked what the people being written about building the whole time. Arendt is arrested at the archive. She proved race is not who you are. She can't tell you who you are. For that, the archive is useless. You need the dialectic. But before we build, one more theory has to fall. The one that read Arendt's autopsy and drew the wrong conclusion. If race was invented, we should just ignore it. The colorblind right. The colorblind right read the autopsy. Race was invented. Race is a political weapon. Race has no biological reality worth organizing life around. All true. And from those true premises, they drew a conclusion. If race was invented, stop believing in it. Refuse to see it. Judge character, not color. And the whole bloody category dies of neglect. And I want to be honest with you. Of every theory in this video, this is the one that's closest to right. It correctly refuses the condition definition. It refuses to let oppression define a people. It looks at Fanon's eternal struggle and correctly says that's a prison. And I'm a conservative. This year I published a paper in the European Journal of Political Theory on what conservatism actually is. My argument there was that conservatism is not a set of abstract principles, it's a vision oriented toward preserving institutions. So what follows is not an attack from the outside. This is the conservative vision, auditing colorblindness by its own standard. Start with the question my paper turns on. What is an institution? The fashionable answer is that it's a pattern of norms, rules, conventions, a label if you like. The answer is wrong. An institution is a community. Actual people perform, sustain, and embody a set of norms across generations. A family is not its house rules. A family is the people. And here's the part that matters most. You do not exist before your institutions. There is no isolated individual who comes first and joins communities later for his own advantage. You become who you are through the institutions you participate in, through being recognized and recognizing others in roles those institutions make possible. That's not just my opinion, that's an argument that I published, and it's Hegel's. Now, watch colorblindness walk into it. Colorblindness says race is just a label. Refuse the label and be an individual. Judge character, not color. That's half right. Race is just a label. It's Boulainvillier's label, Gobineau's label, the contract's label. Refuse it. I do. But look at what's standing underneath the label. The black church, the schools raised from nothing, the mutual aid societies, the families that held under a system built to break them. Those are not just mere labels, those are institutions, communities of people sustaining norms across generations. The oldest ones in this country built entirely from below, and colorblindness cannot tell the label from the institutions. So when it says drop the category, it means all of it. Exit the inheritance, be an individual. But there is no individual underneath. There never is for anyone. The self that colorblindness wants to liberate is a self that exists nowhere except inside institutions. It's being asked to abandon those very institutions though. And that can't be considered transcendence or even amnesia. It's asking a people to unexist politely. And Hegel tells you why it can't work. Freedom is not a declaration. Freedom is a process. 5 stages. Work through in order. You cannot skip from bondage to freedom by announcing the categories of ruin. The consciousness that hasn't done the work isn't free, it's just lost. Now let me show you the deeper betrayal, because the man colorblindness claims as his grandfather built his entire philosophy against exactly this. Edmund Burke, the father of modern conservatism. Burke's entire philosophy stands on one idea. Liberty entailed inheritance, an estate handed down from your forefathers, held in trust, transmitted to your posterity. You are not an abstract individual, you are an heir. That is the conservative insight. That is the whole tradition. So ask the question, what does a Burkean conservative say to the one people in America whose entire identity is entailed in inheritance? Institutions built under bondage, virtues transmitted through generations, an estate of character held in trust since before the founding. A real Burkean has one available answer: honor it and conserve it. That inheritance is the most conservative thing in America. Instead, the colorblind right tells people your inheritance is an illusion. Drop it. Be an individual. The rights of man. No reference to your forefathers. Burke's target was exactly this man. The man who thinks society is a contract between abstract individuals, stripped, as Burke put it, every relation and all the nakedness and solitude of metaphysical abstraction. Burke had a name for people who talk like that. He called them Jacobins. The colorblind right quotes Burke on Monday and asks Black America to be Jacobins on Tuesday. It conserves every inheritance in the country except one. So no, colorblindness is not arrested at a stage. Colorblindness denies the process ever happened. It wants the freedom at the end of the dialectic without the labor in the middle. And Hegel already showed us who else wanted that. The consciousness that skips the work stays a slave to its own history. It just stops looking at it. 5 theories, 5 failures. Garvey arrested at the racial empire. Fanon arrested at the struggle. Mills arrested at the classification. Arendt arrested at the archive. The colorblind right arrested in denial that there was ever a process at all. Every one of them failed in the same way. They could not tell the label from the people. So now we do what none of them could do. We pull race and ethnicity apart for good. And I'll show you what it actually means to be Black, to be a foundational Black American. What is Black if not the struggle? I asked that question 4 months ago and promised an answer. Here it is. Black is not a color. Black is not a condition. Black is not the struggle. Black, foundational Black American, is a people, a lineage constituted by what it built. Now let's pull them apart for good. 2 words, 2 different things. They've been wielded together for 300 years, and every theory in this video died on that wheel. Race is the label. Boulainville forged it for a French Civil War. Gobineau retooled it for a dying caste. Empire mass-produced it. The contract notarized it. It was invented by white elites, for white factions, and at no point in its biography did it ever describe what a people actually is. Race is real the way a brand burned into the skin is real. It tells you who held the iron. It tells you nothing about the man. Ethnicity is the people. And I can tell you exactly what a people is because I published a definition. An institution. A community of actual persons who perform, sustain, and embody a set of norms across generations. Not a pattern, not even a category. A living thing that makes its members who they are. So run the test. Tear up the contract. White supremacy ends tomorrow morning. What is Black on a Tuesday? On Mill's account, nothing. On Fanon's account, nothing. On this account, everything. The churches still stand on Tuesday. The lineage still runs on Tuesday. The inheritance still transmits on Tuesday. Because none of it was ever made of white attention. Remember the word I told you to hold on to. Written. Mills built a philosophy where Black people appear in the document and never hold the pen. Here is the correction. While the contract was being drafted about them, foundational Black Americans were writing themselves, not in ink, in work. Every congregation founded in secret, every letter learned under penalty, every family reassembled after the auction block tore it apart. That is authorship. A people is not what gets written about it. A people is what it writes in the world, in institutions, in its children. And now I can show you the whole process. Because being black is not a status, it's a 5-stage dialectic, Hegel's dialectic, and it maps onto FBA history stage by stage. Stage 1, the struggle to the death, the capture, the passage, the confrontation Fanon never left. Happened. It's real. It is the beginning, not the identity. Stage 2, bondage. Hegel says something here that nobody expects. The master wins and stagnates. He doesn't work. He consumes. He depends on the slave for everything and learns nothing. The bondsman works. And in working, Hegel says the bondsman does what the master can never do. He forms the world. He puts his mind into matter and sees himself looking back. The hands that built the actual country, the crops, the buildings, the wealth, belong to the bondsman. Consciousness is educated through labor. Consciousness is educated through labor. Freedom enters history through the one who works. One American understood this before almost anyone, Booker T. Washington, a man born in bondage, who built an institution from nothing, and who taught that the hand educates the soul. He's been slandered for a century as an accommodationist. He was a Hegelian without the vocabulary. He knew the master's son was rotten in idleness, while the freedman's daughter was becoming someone through the work of her own hands. Formative activity. That was his entire philosophy. Stage 3, Stoicism. Freedom moves inside. The body is chained. The mind declares itself free anyways. You've heard Stage 3. You've heard it your whole life. It's the spirituals. The songs written by people whose bodies were owned by the self no bill of sale could reach. Interior kingdom. Freedom in the mind, waiting for the world to catch up. Stage 4, Skepticism. The freeman tests the world's promises and watches them dissolve. Emancipation, betrayed. Reconstruction, abandoned. The law, a dead letter below the Mason-Dixon. Skepticism is the stage where consciousness learns that the world's categories are counterfeit and starts trusting nothing but what it built itself. Every FBA institution that survived Jim Crow was forged in stage 4. Stage 5 is the unhappy consciousness, the self-divided. One soul that remembers the auction block, one soul that knows it built the country. Both are so real, both yours, neither letting go of the other. Du Bois stood exactly here and he called it double consciousness. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings in one dark body. And he thought it was a permanent condition. It isn't. It's a stage. The last stage before freedom. The moment consciousness carries both truths at once, right before it discovers that they were never two truths. Because here is the exit. The unhappy consciousness resolves when it recognizes that the world is alienated from it built. The memory of bondage and the knowledge of formative power are not two souls. They are one story. The story of a people that walked into the furnace as captives and forged itself into a nation on the way through. The reconciliation is recognition, recognizing your own hands in the world around you. That's Hegel's freedom. You don't need escapism, you don't need victory over the master. What you need is ownership of what you made, which includes yourself. Arendt gave us two options. Remember them. Race thinking is a doctrine of decay. The dialectic is a doctrine of development. Every race theory in this video was a decay doctrine. Gabonneau's fallen civilizations, Fanon's identity with an expiration date, Mill's category that dies with the contract, even colorblindness, which just wants the decay over with. This, what I've shown you, is the only account on the table where being black is a development, a process with a direction, a people becoming itself. So, race is a process. That's how this video started, and now you know what it means. Every theory we walked through got arrested at one stage and mistook that stage for the whole thing. Garvey arrested at the empire, Fanon at the struggle, Mills at the classification, Arendt at the archive, the colorblind right at the denial, blackness FBA identity, rightly understood, is the only conception in this entire debate that refuses arrest. It moves. It has moved for 400 years through the struggle, through the bondage, through the interior kingdom, through the broken promises, through the divided soul, toward the recognition that the people the world kept trying to define had been defining itself the whole time. Race is what they call us. A people is what we built. One of those is a label. The other one is mine.